For 5 years, one man has been the most consistent creator in the Premier League. Not occasionally, not in a good season, consistently. But here's what makes this story bigger than statistics. Frank Lampard, the Premier League's greatest ever goal-scoring midfielder, Chelsea's all-time top scorer with 211 goals, the man who redefined what a midfielder could do, looked at Bruno Fernandes and saw something he recognised. The intelligence, the deception, the end product, the refusal to hide when the game is on the line. And long before the world caught up, Lampard said it clearly: Fernandez is a top player. Since arriving in January 2020, managers have come and gone, systems have shifted, roles have changed, but the numbers, they never dropped. Even during the 2025-26 stretch under Amorim, when Bruno was pushed deeper, given more defensive work, asked to be something he'd never quite been asked to be before, he was still leading the Premier League in assists and chances created. Deeper role, more responsibility, same output.
Welcome back to Old Trafford. Bruno Fernandes continuing to be the manager's man on the pitch.
Then Carrick stepped in, 7 league games unbeaten, 6 wins, 1 draw. And at the centre of every single moment, Bruno, scoring, assisting, dictating tempo, pointing, pressing, demanding. Not just playing the game, managing it from midfield. Lampard didn't just praise him, he was recognising him. This is how Lampard identified a modern Premier League benchmark and how Bruno Fernandes proved that managers may change, but the output never does.
Semenyo's trying hard to get back. It's Bruyne and Bumo at the Stretford end!
When Bruno Fernandes signed for Manchester United from Sporting in January 2020, it didn't feel like a normal transfer. It felt like a system update. United weren't broken exactly, but they were drifting. The football had spells of purpose, but not enough direction. Big games were turning into coin flips. Chance creation came and went, and in the moments that mattered most, United looked like a team standing around waiting for someone else to take control, waiting for someone to point at the problem and say, "This is how we fix it." Then Bruno arrived. Officially completed at the end of January on a long-term deal for an initial fee of around £46.6 million, rising with add-ons, and almost immediately you could see exactly what he was. Not just a number 10, not just a creator, not just a shooter. He was a tempo setter, a demanding, restless, occasionally furious organiser who points where the ball should go before it's even there and gets visibly frustrated when nobody else sees it. You know the type, the player who makes everyone around him slightly uncomfortable, slightly on edge, slightly sharper. The player who raises the emotional temperature of a team just by being in it. United didn't need months to integrate him, to ease him into the system, to wait for the new signing dust to settle. Bruno arrived mid-season and still finished that first half campaign with 22 appearances, 12 goals and 8 assists across all competitions. That's not a player settling in, that's a player hijacking the team's identity and making it his own within weeks. And the league form reflected it. From Bruno's debut onward in 2019-20, United stacked points at title-level pace across the run-in, 32 points from 14 league games after his Premier League debut window began. The club wasn't suddenly a different team tactically. They were the same squad, largely the same players, largely the same system, but now they had a central brain. Transitions became more decisive, final third actions became more intentional. Players around him looked like they'd been given permission to be brave again. Now, there's a conversation that always comes up with Bruno, and it's worth addressing directly rather than dancing around it. The penalty thing. Some people reduce him to pen merchant talk, as if the penalty goals somehow don't count, somehow inflate the numbers artificially. But here's the honest truth about penalties. They're not a cheat code, they're responsibility, they're pressure. They're the moment when the whole stadium goes quiet, 60,000 people hold their breath, and the creative guy has to become the executioner. Bruno took that weight early, and he didn't blink. Even in his opening month, he was scoring from the spot and creating in the same games. That combination, scorer and creator, both in the same 90 minutes, is exactly why the comparisons to the very best midfielders started almost immediately. Here's where the story gets genuinely interesting, because the Premier League is not kind to midfielders who live on freedom. Systems change, managers change, pressing schemes change. Your best role gets ripped away. Players who look unstoppable in one system become invisible in the next. Bruno didn't just survive those changes, he ate them. Under Solskjaer, he was the face of the rebuild, the high-risk creator carrying the final pass and the final shot, the one the whole attack ran through. Then Rangnick arrived, the chaos increased, the control decreased, and Bruno remained the one consistently forcing the game forward. Then came Ten Hag. Responsibility shifted between structured build-up and transition moments, and Bruno remained the volume source of chances regardless. Every new voice in the dugout, every new idea about how United should play, every new system demanding something slightly different, and there Bruno was, still at the top of the creative output charts, still the heartbeat of everything going forward. And then came the Amorim stretch, and this is where the system-proof genius theme becomes genuinely undeniable. Under Amorim, there were long stretches this season where Bruno wasn't even living in the classic number 10 zone. He was asked to operate deeper, doing more connective work, carrying more of the build-up burden in a role that suits different physical and technical profiles. Add a short injury spell around late December and early January that disrupted his rhythm, and you'd have every reason to expect a dip in output, every reason to point to circumstances and explain away a quieter patch. Instead, he surged to the front of the Premier League's playmaker race and had 12 assists in his last 15 league appearances at one point. This season's numbers tell the full story. 82 chances created in the league, the most of any player in the Premier League, alongside 7 goals and 13 assists. His chances created per 90 minutes ranks among the very best in Manchester United's Premier League history. When people say managers have changed but the output hasn't, that isn't a nice line. That's literally what the data says. Then January arrives. The club makes a major switch. Michael Carrick takes over as interim manager after Amorim's dismissal, and United immediately stabilise. 7 league games unbeaten, 6 wins and 1 draw. The whole atmosphere around the club shifting from anxiety to something resembling belief. And who's at the centre of it? Bruno. Again, always Bruno. In United's comeback over Crystal Palace on March 1st, the match report almost reads like a scene written specifically for him. He scores the penalty to level the game, then delivers the ball that creates the winner, goal and assist. Captain dragging the game back under control when it was slipping away. That's not just production, that's dictating, deciding when United slow down, when they punch, when they take the risk, when they squeeze the opponent until something breaks. That's a field manager. That's a player running the game from inside it. And to tell this story properly, you can't present Bruno as a pure luxury creator, because the modern Premier League doesn't allow luxury creators to survive for long. Bruno's pressing intensity, his willingness to sprint back into defensive shape, his constant pointing and demanding and organising, that's part of his real influence, and always has been. He's not perfect defensively, he'll be the first to admit that, but he works. He leads the press, sets triggers, demands reactions from his teammates, especially when United lose control and the game turns ugly and less creative players go quiet. That's the system-proof edge. Some creators disappear when the match stops being pretty. Bruno stays visible, sometimes too visible, sometimes too emotional, too intense, too much, but always present. Here's the cleanest way to understand it. Bruno didn't arrive at United and simply make them better. That's too small a way to describe it. He arrived and gave them a personality, a team that plays with direction instead of hope, a team with a midfielder who can be the creator, the finisher and the leader in the same 90 minutes. A team where no matter which manager is sitting in the dugout with a different philosophy and a different idea of how football should be played, the output remains tied to the same man. Managers have changed, the output hasn't.
Let's put the timeline away for a second and talk about the type of player we're actually dealing with, because this is where the Bruno story stops being a great creator at a big club and starts looking like something the Premier League has genuinely only seen a handful of times. If you grew up watching Premier League football, you already know the reference point the moment someone mentions a midfielder who scores goals, not occasionally, not luckily, but consistently in big moments over a long period of time. Frank Lampard. Not because he was the flashiest passer, not because he had silky footwork or step-over combinations that made highlight reels, but because he did the one thing midfielders were fundamentally not supposed to do, over and over again for more than a decade, and made it look completely natural. Lampard didn't just score goals from midfield, he rewrote what midfield goals even meant. Chelsea's official records frame it plainly. Frank Lampard is their all-time leading scorer with 211 goals, and they describe him as having redefined what a goal-scoring midfielder was capable of. Now zoom out to the Premier League numbers and it gets almost uncomfortable to read. 609 appearances, 177 goals, 102 assists. The Premier League calls him the competition's highest scoring midfielder ever, a record that has held not just because of talent, but because of volume, durability and a very specific kind of tactical genius that most players never develop. Here's the crucial thing people misunderstand about Lampard. He wasn't a striker who happened to start slightly deeper. He was a midfielder who mastered timing. Lampard's real superpower was the late arrival, the run that begins at the exact moment defenders think the danger has already passed, the ball has already moved on, the threat has already been contained. In Mourinho's Chelsea, the structure was almost perfectly engineered for him, a holding midfielder anchoring the zone behind, wingers stretching the pitch wide, a striker occupying both centre-backs, and then Lampard arriving into the box as the extra man, the one nobody had been assigned, the one who shouldn't be there. Then Ancelotti arrives and starts experimenting with variations, the diamond midfield, repositioning Lampard within it depending on who played at the tip, and Lampard just adapted, kept producing, kept arriving at the right moment. He was never locked into one rigid role, he was a concept, second wave runner, edge of box shooter, set piece taker, penalty taker, the midfielder who could turn a 1-0 lead into a 2-0 game with one perfectly timed run that the whole opposition defence somehow missed. That's why the word redefined gets used about him, because he made end product from midfield feel repeatable and deliberate, not accidental. He didn't score 177 Premier League goals by luck, he scored them by understanding space and timing better than everyone around him. If Lampard is the Premier League's benchmark for midfield end product, Bruno Fernandes is the benchmark for midfield end product plus creative volume at a scale that almost doesn't make sense. And what makes this comparison land isn't a feeling or a vibe, it's output. This season, Bruno leads the Premier League with 12 assists, has created 82 chances, the most of any player in the league, and sits at the absolute top of every meaningful creative metric. But here's the number that genuinely stops you in your tracks. Since Bruno's debut in February 2020, he has created 151 more chances than Kevin De Bruyne, who sits second over that same period. The Premier League highlighted this themselves. For half a decade, nobody in English football has fed the game more chances than Bruno Fernandes. Read that again slowly. 151 more chances than Kevin De Bruyne, one of the greatest creative midfielders the league has ever seen, over 5 years. Not a small gap, 151 chances. So Bruno became the template for creation at industrial scale, while still carrying real goal numbers and taking full responsibility in the biggest moments. Now here's where it gets tactically interesting, because Lampard and Bruno don't actually dominate in the same way, and understanding the difference makes the comparison sharper, not weaker. Lampard's best Chelsea sides were built around a very clear idea: stability behind him, width around him, a forward line that occupied defenders so he could arrive late and untracked. Whether it was the 4-3-3 under Mourinho or the variations Ancelotti tried, Lampard's end product wasn't random, it was engineered by spacing and timing. The structure created the conditions, and Lampard exploited them with ruthless consistency. Bruno's dominance is different. Bruno thrives when he's allowed to drift between the lines, combine quickly, take risks that other midfielders won't even consider, arrive late into the box and play passes that most players wouldn't even see as options. One analyst put it brilliantly when looking at the tension under Amorim: the issue with a rigid, defensively demanding system is that it asked Bruno to be more disciplined, take fewer risks, track runners more diligently, and that's simply not where his game breathes. Bruno's game breathes in movement, in chaos, in quick combinations and improvisation, and the freedom to make decisions that might not work, but occasionally produce something nobody else on the pitch could have created. Under structured coaches, he can still produce, the numbers prove that, but his peak version comes when the system gives him permission to improvise, and across every shape he's played in, 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3, the deeper hybrid roles Amorim forced on him, the output engine keeps running at the same level. The system changes, the behaviours that create chances don't. That's what system-proof actually looks like. So let's land this cleanly, not as a debate about who was better, but as a diagnosis of what both players actually are. Lampard was a goal-heavy midfielder. Bruno is a hybrid creator plus scorer. Different emphasis, different eras, different teams. But underneath all of that, they share the exact traits that define top-tier Premier League midfield dominance. Both are high-risk takers. They accept that turnovers will happen because the reward for getting it right is decisive, game-changing actions. Both carry enormous responsibility in the moments that weigh the most: set pieces, penalties, late game situations when everyone else wants to give the ball to somebody else. Both don't hide, both demand the moment, and both lead. Lampard led through consistency and decision-making, through the relentless accumulation of big performances that eventually became his identity. Bruno leads loudly, pointing, directing, demanding, running at teammates with instructions, essentially acting as a coach on the pitch who happens to be the most technically gifted player on it. Different styles of leadership, same fundamental need to own the game around them. Here's the thesis that ties all of this together. Lampard was the Premier League's benchmark attacking midfielder of his era. He made the league respect what a midfielder could do at the end of a move, how much damage a number 8 could cause arriving late, carrying responsibility, turning up in finals and title races and quarterfinals with goals that changed everything. Bruno Fernandes is that benchmark now, just with a modern toolkit, a bigger creative load, more responsibility concentrated in a single player than almost any midfielder in the game's recent history has been asked to carry, and he carries it under every manager, in every role, across every system, and still produces. Lampard made the league respect midfield end product. Bruno makes the league live with it, every week, under every manager, in every role. And that's why when you look back now, Lampard's recognition of what Bruno is doesn't feel like one legend complementing another, it feels like one benchmark acknowledging the next.
To understand how serious Bruno Fernandes is as a Premier League creator, you have to place him in the right context. And the right context is the De Bruyne era, the period where the league's creative standards were essentially set by one midfielder in sky blue week after week, season after season. Kevin De Bruyne didn't just lead the charts, he broke them. He holds the joint record for most assists in a single Premier League season, 20 in 2019-20, a number only Thierry Henry has ever matched. City's own records show how he repeatedly returned to the top of the assist race, including 14 assists in 2022-23 alone. For a long stretch, De Bruyne wasn't competing for the title of best creator in the league, he was the title.
So the question was never, can Bruno have a good season? The real test was harder than that. Can he still look elite while De Bruyne is operating at full power? Can he compete in the same conversation, in the same era, against the same standard? The answer, backed by the numbers, is yes. Since Bruno's Premier League debut on February the 1st, 2020, he has created 151 more chances than De Bruyne, who ranks second over that same period. And across those same years, he sits just 1 assist behind De Bruyne in total. The Premier League published that comparison themselves. 151 more chances against the man who redefined what creative midfield play looks like in the modern game. He hasn't replaced De Bruyne. That's not the point. The point is he never left the conversation. While everything around him changed, the managers, the systems, the teammates, the chaos, Bruno just kept creating, kept feeding, kept driving the league's chance volume as if the turbulence around him was completely irrelevant. And when Lampard looked at Bruno and recognized something familiar, the intelligence, the deception, the influence, the end product, he wasn't just being complimentary about a fellow midfielder. He was identifying a player who carries the full profile, the complete package, the kind that arrives once in a generation and quietly reshapes what the position is supposed to look like. The Premier League had every chance to see this coming. The Premier League was warned